Life sure has a funny way of kicking you when you're down. Just 3 weeks ago, I caught my boyfriend of 2 years cheating. There I was, thinking I was about to surprise him with anniversary tickets to Japan, and instead, I got the surprise of a lifetime. So when my best friend, Sarah, dragged me to this party, saying it'd be good for me to get out, I wasn't exactly thrilled. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. You need to stop moping around your apartment. It's just a bunch of us hanging out, nothing fancy. Come on, Anna, it'll be fun. I remember standing at the edge of the crowded living room, holding a cup of beer I had no intention of drinking. The music was too loud, and I felt out of place among strangers laughing and dancing like they didn't have a care in the world. That's when Eric sauntered over, a beer in one hand and a grin that probably worked on every other girl. Hey, I haven't seen you around before. I'm Eric. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or flirty banter. Anna, and before you waste your time, I'm not interested in whatever this is supposed to be. He raised an eyebrow, looking more amused than put off. That's fine. Can I at least keep you company then? I should have said no, walked away, but there was something disarmingly earnest about him. Fine, but keep it to the weather and other boring stuff. We talked. Well, he talked, and I listened. About mundane things. The weather, like I asked, how he knew the host through a friend of a friend, and somehow, it was comforting. He didn't push, didn't try to flirt again. By the end of the night, I was actually laughing, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Sarah caught up with me as I was getting ready to leave. See, I told you it'd be good for you. What do you think of Eric? He's been hanging around you all night. I shrugged, trying to sound indifferent. He's okay. Not annoying, at least. She nudged me, a smirk playing on her lips. Just okay. That's why you've been smiling like an idiot for the last hour. Maybe she was right, maybe Eric was just what I needed, a distraction, a friend, someone who knew nothing about my past and my broken heart. But as I left the party, his last words echoed in my mind, making me question if I was really ready for whatever was coming next. Hope to see you again, Anna. It was nice, just talking. The morning after the party, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I was about to swipe it to voicemail, thinking it was just another telemarketer, when I saw the text that followed. Hey Anna, it's Eric. Got your number from Sarah. Hope that's cool. Fancy a coffee? Strictly as friends, I swear. I stared at the screen, half annoyed, half amused. How typical of Sarah to play matchmaker. And Eric, well, he was either genuinely nice or very persistent. Either way, a cup of coffee wouldn't kill me. Might even help drown out the boredom. Sure, why not? But I'm holding you to that friends-only promise, I replied, setting the tone right off the bat. The coffee turned into a walk in the park, and before I knew it, one meetup turned into 2, then 3. He was easy to be around, didn't pry into my life, and never pushed beyond casual topics. I could feel myself relaxing, enjoying his company more than I thought I would. A couple of months in, and we were unmistakably a thing. Eric suggested we should finally tell our friends we were seeing each other. I agreed. It was about time. Then came the big meet with his parents. I was nervous, obviously. Meeting the parents is never just meeting the parents, is it? We drove up to this decent-looking house, and Eric squeezed my hand. Don't worry, they'll love you. We walked in, and there they were, Eric's mom and dad, looking as decent as their house. Eric introduced me, and his mom, Mrs. Whitaker, sized me up with a look that could curdle milk. So, Anna, what is it that you do? I'm an editor at a publishing house, I said, trying to sound confident. Mrs. Whitaker made a face like she'd bitten into a lemon. Oh, how quaint. Eric tells me you've been seeing a lot of each other. He's a successful investment manager, you know. Makes quite a good living. I didn't miss the implication. Yeah, he mentioned that. Eric, bless him, jumped in. Mom, Anna's really good at what she does. She's passionate about books. Mrs. Whittaker just hummed, clearly unimpressed. The dinner went downhill from there, with me feeling like I was on trial and Eric trying to smooth things over. 6 months later, out of the blue, Eric proposed. It was sweet, romantic even, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were moving too fast. Still, I said yes. I loved him, after all, even if his mother was going to be a piece of work. The news of our engagement didn't sit well with the Whittakers. The next thing I knew, Eric and I were sitting across the table from his parents, talking prenups. Now, we think it's fair if the agreement states that neither party will claim the other's assets in the event of a divorce, Mr. Whittaker stated, sliding a document towards us. I skimmed through it, my heart sinking. Okay, but I want to add a clause. If one of us cheats, the cheater pays $150,000. Eric looked shocked, but I held my ground. It's non-negotiable, Eric. Anna, I'd never cheat on you, he said, taking my hand. Just a precaution, babe. If you're not planning on cheating, you've got nothing to worry about, right? I shot back, not willing to budge on this. Mr. Whittaker raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Very well, if that makes you feel secure, we'll add it. The document was amended, and Eric promised again, in front of his parents, never to cheat. I hoped he meant it. The wedding, despite the looming presence of the Whittakers, was simpler than most would expect. Eric and I opted for a quiet affair, more about love than spectacle. Even his parents, who I had expected to fuss and frown, seemed genuinely pleased as they watched us dance our first dance. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The first 2 years flew by like a dream. Eric was everything you could ask for in a husband, attentive, caring, and always making me feel like the most important person in his world. I really thought I had hit the jackpot, considering how we started. But then the bickering started, not from Eric, but from his mother. Mrs. Whittaker, who had seemed to accept me at our wedding, began dropping not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren. The hints became nagging, and the nagging turned into outright criticism when months then years passed without a pregnancy announcement. One Sunday dinner, which had become a dreaded weekly ritual, was particularly harsh. We were all sitting around the table when Mrs. Whittaker decided to bring up the topic again. So, Anna, still no news of any little ones on the way? She asked, passing the roast as if she were just making casual conversation. I tried to keep my voice steady. No, not yet. She said, shaking her head. You know, you're not getting any younger. It's really such a shame, a real shame indeed. I felt Eric squeeze my hand under the table, a silent sign of support that was becoming rarer these days. The lack of children wasn't for lack of trying, it was a painful, private struggle that his mother refused to respect. But it didn't stop at dinner conversations. She'd call me during the day, her voice dripping with insincere concern. Anna, maybe you should see another doctor, you know, someone more capable. Or she'd drop comments in front of relatives. Eric could have had kids by now if only. And then there were her visits to our house. One afternoon, as I was trying to make a new recipe, she stood in the kitchen, watching me like a hawk. You know, Anna, if you can't manage to do this right, how can you manage a child? Maybe Eric should consider hiring a cook. And a cleaner while he's at it, since you're always so busy. Her words stung, and I almost dropped the pan I was holding. I'm doing just fine, Mrs. Whittaker. Eric is happy, that's what matters. Her laugh was cold, a sound that was becoming all too familiar. Well, manage it better. Eric deserves that much. And what hurt the most was that Eric, my supposed partner, began to echo his mother's words. One evening, as we cleaned up after another tense family dinner, he let slip his own frustrations. Anna, Mom does have a point about the house, maybe we should consider getting some help. It's just, everything would be easier, wouldn't it? Easier for you, maybe. I'm your wife, Eric, not an employee to be evaluated and found lacking. His response was a shrug, a simple, heartbreaking shrug that spoke volumes. My marriage, which had started as a fairy tale, was slowly morphing into something unrecognizable, poisoned by constant criticism and unmet expectations. Things started changing gradually, so much that at first, I told myself I was imagining things. It started with the phone calls. Eric's phone was constantly buzzing, and whenever I glanced over, it was always the same male name, Tommy. Innocent enough, but something about the way Eric's face tensed up each time the phone rang piqued my curiosity. One evening, while we were watching TV and his phone went off again, I casually asked, "Who's Tommy? You've been chatting a lot lately." Eric stiffened, the remote clutched a bit too tightly in his hand. "Oh, Tommy? That's just the guy from the car service. Lots of issues with the car lately." "Really? Because you've never mentioned any car trouble to me." I kept my tone light, but I watched him closely. He avoided my eyes, focusing on the muted TV. "It's just routine stuff, Anna. No big deal." But it was a big deal, the way he was so quick to shut down the conversation. That was the moment the seed of doubt planted itself firmly in my mind. And once it was there, everything else started to make sense: the late nights at work, the sudden changes in his appearance. Eric had always been a jeans and t-shirt kind of guy. Now, all of a sudden, he was into tailored suits and designer cologne. Even his hair, which he'd always worn in a simple, low-maintenance style, was now slicked back in a trendier cut. The changes were as sudden as they were unexplained. When I asked him about it, he shrugged it off. "I just thought I'd try something new, shake things up a bit." Not convinced and unable to shake off the nagging thoughts, I did something I never thought I would. I contacted a private investigator. It felt like something out of a cheesy detective show, but I needed to know. If my marriage was falling apart, I wasn't going to be the last to realize it. I met with the PI, a no-nonsense woman named Marla, who promised discretion and thoroughness. "We'll get to the bottom of it," she assured me, and I believed her. 3 weeks of agonizing wait later, Marla called me in for a meeting. The news was as bad as I had feared. Eric was having an affair. She slid photographs across the desk to me, pictures of Eric with a woman, clearly more than just friends. They were laughing, holding hands, kissing. "Want us to keep tailing him? Get more evidence?" Marla asked, her voice businesslike. I nodded, feeling numb. "Yes, please. I need everything you can get. It's not just for me. It's for a divorce case." I didn't confront Eric. Not yet. I needed my ducks in a row first. But sleeping next to him that night, knowing what I knew, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every time he touched me, I flinched. Every "I love you" twisted a knife in my gut. It was a Thursday evening like any other. Eric thought I was wrapped up in my book, a thriller that seemed bland compared to the real-life drama unfolding in my own home. I sat curled up on the couch, the book lying forgotten on my lap, my ears tuned not to the pages, but to the hushed, venomous conversation spilling out from Eric's study. His voice, a whisper threaded with frustration, reached me, clear and cutting. "Yes, Mom, I know. I'm tired of it all, tired of pretending. No, she still doesn't know anything. And, yes, she can't give me children, I don't feel anything for her anymore." The words stung, every syllable a betrayal. My heart raced, my palms sweaty as I leaned closer, barely breathing. His mother's voice was like a hiss, barely audible. "Just wait a little longer, darling. My 70th birthday is coming up. Let Anna give me a lovely, expensive gift as she always does, then you can drop the bomb. After that, we can kick her to the curb easily." Their laughter, low and conspiratorial, boiled my blood. I set the book down, my mind racing, plotting, planning. By the time Eric ended the call and returned to the living room, my face was a mask of normalcy, hiding the storm raging inside. "Who was that?" I asked, injecting a casual note into my voice. "Oh, just my mom. Planning her big birthday bash," he replied, flopping down beside me, unaware of the betrayal I'd just overheard. The days crawled by as I nursed my wrath and waited for the right moment. It came a few days later, during one of those stiflingly formal dinners at Mrs. Whitaker's house. The dining room was choked with the heavy scent of her expensive perfume and the richer aroma of the gourmet meal spread before us. As we were finishing dessert, Mrs. Whitaker turned to me with a gleam in her eye, the kind that spelled trouble. "So, Anna, my dear, what are you planning for my milestone birthday? I do hope it's something extraordinary." Keeping my voice light, I smiled, a plan already forming in my mind. I thought a dinner at La Maison, the new upscale restaurant downtown. A night of luxury for a luxurious lady. Her eyes lit up, greed thinly veiled by her genteel facade. "Oh, Anna, that sounds delightful. Just the family, of course." Eric chimed in, his voice smooth, betraying none of his earlier resignation. "Mom's turning 70 only once, after all. We should make it memorable." "Oh, it will be memorable," I affirmed, my smile sharp enough to cut. "A night you'll remember for the rest of your life, I'm sure." They missed the steel beneath my words, caught up in their own scheming. The days leading up to the birthday dinner were a masterclass in pretense. I played the devoted wife and daughter-in-law, all the while my heart was a stone in my chest, heavy with the knowledge of their duplicity. The grand day of Mrs. Whitaker's 70th birthday was everything she had demanded and more. La Maison was the kind of place where the chandeliers cost more than a small car, and the wine list read like a who's who of vineyard royalty. As I entered the restaurant, my heart was a mix of heavy dread and grim determination. We were seated at a large table, the velvet chairs and pristine table settings an ironic backdrop to the duplicity at play. Mrs. Whitaker was radiant, draped in silk and jewels, reveling in the luxury that she believed was funded by my unconditional generosity. Family and a few close friends, all oblivious to the storm brewing, chattered and laughed, filling the opulent dining space with a light-hearted buzz. The menus were handed out, and I watched as eyes widened at the gourmet selections. Mrs. Whitaker, playing the magnanimous host, encouraged everyone to order whatever they fancied. "It's a special day, indulge a little," she trilled, her voice dripping with the sweetness of a woman who believed she was on the verge of getting everything she wanted. As the orders were placed and the wine flowed, the bill, a staggering $3,500,000, was discreetly mentioned to me by a waiter. Nodding, I handed over my card with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The transaction went through, the waiter nodded. It was then that Eric leaned towards me, his breath tinged with the expensive wine he'd been downing all evening. With a smirk that I had grown to detest, he said loud enough for all the guests at the table to hear, "By the way, I'm filing for divorce. We're done, Anna." The words were meant to shatter, to humiliate. But I only smiled, watching as confusion replaced smugness on his face. Mrs. Whitaker, not missing a beat, chimed in, her voice sharp. "Well then, I suppose you won't be staying for dessert, Anna. This is a family gathering, after all." The table fell silent, the guests' forks suspended midair as they tried to digest the scene unfolding before them. Eric, his smirk fading into something uglier, sneered, "Hurry up, Anna. I'm sick of watching you fumble around." Without a word, because there was nothing left to say, I picked up my purse and walked out of the restaurant. Driving back to the house we had shared, my movements were mechanical. Methodically, I packed my things, not bothering with sorting or folding. Clothes, essentials, a few personal items, that was all I needed. With my suitcase in hand, I locked the door for the last time and drove to a nearby hotel. The lobby was quiet, the clerk smiled perfunctory as he handed me the keycard to my room. Once inside, I let the suitcase fall with a thud, the sound oddly satisfying. Crossing to the minibar, I pulled out a bottle of champagne, a stark contrast to the evening's earlier vintage, but fitting for the occasion. Popping the cork, the sound was crisp in the quiet room. I poured myself a glass, the bubbles catching the light as I walked over to the window. Looking out at the city lights, I took a sip, the cold, sharp taste grounding me. 3 hours had passed in my hotel room, the champagne now a memory, when my phone erupted with a fury of calls and messages. It started with unrecognized numbers, likely the restaurant or Eric's family members. But then a familiar number appeared, and I couldn't resist answering. It was Mrs. Whitaker, and she was livid. "Anna, what is this embarrassment? The restaurant says the payment didn't go through. What have you done? Her voice was a cacophony of rage and disbelief. I couldn't help but laugh, a sound of genuine amusement that only fueled her fury. Oh, I thought you'd enjoy a little drama, given the occasion. I blocked the shared account beforehand, just a precaution, you understand. You what? Eric couldn't pay for the dinner either. This is your doing, you'll pay for this. The background was a chaos of voices and clattering dishes, the sounds of a scandal in the making. I imagined the scene, restaurant staff cornering them, demanding payment, and the elite of Eric's family scrambling to settle the embarrassment. My plan had unfolded even better than I'd anticipated. Calm down, Mrs. Whitaker. I promised you a memorable evening, and I delivered. I'm sure the other guests found it quite unforgettable too, I quipped, the satisfaction rolling off my tongue. The call ended with her sputtering threats and insults, but I was already disconnecting, my smile unwavering. I knew she had no real power over me anymore. The following morning, fortified by a night of restful defiance, I drove to the house that was no longer my home. Clutching the divorce papers and the evidence of Eric's infidelity, I felt armed and invincible. As I stepped into the living room, Eric and Mrs. Whitaker were waiting, their faces a tableau of shock and anger. Anna, this is absurd. You think you can just ruin things and walk away? Eric's voice was a blend of betrayal and panic. I tossed the divorce papers on the coffee table. Actually, yes, that's exactly what I think. And here's something to make the separation easier for you. I slid the photos across the table, their glossy surfaces catching the light, revealing images of Eric's deceit. What is this? Anna, please, let's talk about this, Eric stammered, his facade crumbling as he flipped through the photos. Mrs. Whitaker snatched up the papers, her eyes darting over the text. You won't get away with this. I'll sue you for every penny for that dinner disaster. I leaned in, my voice steady. The dinner was booked in your name, remember? You're welcome to explain that to a judge. But I'm here for what's mine under our agreement. I reminded them of the prenuptial clause, the one about cheating, triggering a hefty penalty. Eric, you owe me $150,000. Pay up, or I see you in court. The room was thick with tension, their earlier bravado replaced by desperation. Eric looked to his mother, then back at me. Anna, please, isn't there a way we can? No, I cut him off. There's no we anymore. I want the money by the end of the week. The fallout from the birthday dinner debacle didn't just echo through the family, it became a minor sensation online. Apparently, the scene at the restaurant had been too juicy for the other diners to ignore. Videos surfaced on social media showing Mrs. Whitaker's dramatic meltdown. The sight of her fighting off the police's gentle restraint and screaming at her family to turn out their pockets for cash was replayed, shared, and laughed at across the internet. 2 months post-scandal, sitting in my new apartment, a cozy, sunlit space I bought with the $150,000 Eric's parents grudgingly handed over, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of vindication. Eric had come by himself to deliver the check, a meeting that was as brief as it was bitter. You know, Anna, this didn't have to end this way, Eric had said, his voice low, as he handed me the check. His eyes, those same eyes I once thought I loved, were cold and empty. Take care of yourself, Anna. I always do, I replied, closing the door softly but firmly behind him. Living alone had its perks. I could keep my space as neat or as messy as I liked without hearing Mrs. Whitaker's snide remarks. I could cook whatever I wanted, experimenting with flavors and dishes without someone criticizing every ingredient I chose. But best of all, I could wake up each day knowing that my life was my own again. As the days turned into weeks, the gossip around Eric and his mother's downfall turned into background noise. Friends would call, sometimes giggling before they even spoke. Apparently, Eric had found someone new, a woman Mrs. Whitaker deemed even less suitable than me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She actually said you were a better daughter-in-law, a friend told me over coffee one sunny afternoon. Can you imagine? After everything she put you through? I stirred my coffee, smiling. People always realize what they had when it's gone. But in her case, she realized it a little too late. That evening, as I sat on my small balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the ultimate liberation, it all felt like chapters from someone else's novel. Now, it was just me, my new beginning, and the quiet satisfaction of having come out on the other side stronger and wiser.